In this next episode, I am talking to the wonderful Laura Bremner, and I cannot wait for you to listen because it is that good. Throughout the conversation, Laura shares what imposter syndrome is, where it originated from, and why she thinks most of us don't actually have it. She also dives into what she thinks we have instead and her top tips and strategies for being the best versions of ourselves. Honestly, Laura is so clever and so amazing. So let me tell you a little bit about who she is, what she does, and what qualifies her to be talking to us about all of this today. Laura is an occupational therapist, EMDR practitioner, and wellbeing coach, a mum of 2 girls, owner of a cat, and a husband. Laura is a director of LB Therapy, which specialises in supporting stressed out women who are stuck in autopilot to get a break from the relentless exhaustion that comes from being overloaded, overwhelmed, and overcompensating their whole life. Laura guides women to find their version of freedom and fulfillment in life with clear, practical strategies that make lasting changes. With 17 years of clinical experiences, she uses a wide range of modalities and personal experience of being in the trenches with you to help you figure out what you need to change and how to change it. Think of it as therapy with a plan of action essential for the life you crave. I'm not just saying it when I say I could have spoken to Laura for hours. This conversation is packed with so much insight and incredible knowledge, you really won't regret listening. But before we dive into the good stuff, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to tune in, to show up and be heard. The podcast exists to help women like you simplify your business and your life so that you can stop feeling so overwhelmed. I am your host, Becky McAvoy, owner and founder of Be Heard Socials, and I am an award-winning social media marketer and international speaker who specialises in content strategy and organic growth on social media. If you want to cut through the noise and BS and get practical, actionable advice tailored specifically to make social media marketing accessible and easy to understand, or if you want to be part of a supportive community where women entrepreneurs can feel connected and inspired to achieve their dreams, then keep listening because you are in the right place. To be the first to find out when new episodes go live and to get more tips like the ones you hear in this podcast, make sure you join my email community through the link in my show notes. Whether you have followed me for a while or you are brand new here, I am so grateful for you. All right then, let's get started with this week's episode. Hey Laura, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good. It's becoming my new favourite habit. Like appearing on podcasts. I love it.
I think it's a bit of an addiction when you get going. It's scary when you do it.
It's just nice to have a chat, isn't it? It's nice.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really, really looking forward to chatting to you today because we are going to dig into some of the expert stuff behind self-doubt and strategies and imposter syndrome and all the good stuff. So I'm really looking forward to having a chat. But before we get stuck into it, do you want to tell me a little bit about your story, sort of how your business came about, how you became a business owner, and how you got to kind of where you are today?
Yeah, so I graduated with an occupational therapy degree and went to work for, just followed the normal career path really, went into the NHS and then into social work, and I went across to work in Canada for a bit and worked as an OT out there and came back, and just my career path was definitely mapped out in health. That's what I wanted to do, and I loved being an OT specifically in mental health. And then I started to burn out quite quickly in those services, which is a familiar story, I think, for a lot of people in those kind of caring professions. So sort of knew that I needed to make a change, and I moved over to education and started doing some stuff there, and again kind of had my career path mapped out. And then lockdown happened and it kind of really shifted what I was doing, and I was, back into the NHS again and things. And it just, my own mental health was definitely at its worst during that time. So I had no intentions of being a business owner, but was very aware kind of during lockdown. I've got 2 young children. My daughter was going into primary 1, so I was trying to do all the kind of basic learning stuff that you do. And I had a 2-year-old. So I spent a lot of time on social media for ideas. How the hell do you like get through this period? And I was just blown away with all of the stuff that was on social media, like, that sort of advice, like, like it's totally fine and all your children need is you and to feel safe. And then, oh, but have you also set up your sensory tray for the day? And like, you know, done this, downloaded this free app to teach them how to read and stuff. And I was like, and it was so frustrating. And there's all these memes that come up all the time. And I just could see women around me specifically just getting more and more into themselves and drowning more and more. So sort of said to my husband one night, I was like, oh, this is so frustrating. And there's life coaches popping up everywhere and they've got no qualifications. This is me in my judgmental seat on the sofa. And he was like, well, do something about it then. You put something out if you think you can do better. And that was all I really needed. So I just started, I wrote a bit of a program, a kind of boot camp for your mental health, put it out there. One person said, yeah, I'll do that with you. I did it with her. She had really good results. I was like, oh, I'm enjoying this. And just gradually kind of said, oh, I could maybe work with you on a one-to-one. Let's see what happens. And it just has grown organically from there. I had no intentions of being a business owner at all. It was never in my plan. I've still worked pretty much the whole time I've run my business. I've been going for 3 years now, and gradually sort of every year I've reduced my working hours, and finally just gave up my job this year to kind of focus fully on the business. So it's that's kind of how it started, and it's just been by default, I guess, of seeing a need and knowing that I could add something different into that space.
That is absolutely amazing, and I love all of that. And massive congratulations on taking, because it's such a huge leap to go, actually I'm going to do this full time, and being in a position, getting yourself in a position to be able to do it, because you know it's not easy. So that's amazing. But I also love everything you said. I think, like, and I say this possibly because this is kind of what I did, but some of the best businesses come from a place of like frustration and of going, like, for yourself, going, I don't want to feel like this anymore, and I don't want to do this anymore, and the world just isn't set up. And I think, like, especially for women to succeed and maintain, you know, work-life balance and mental health and all that stuff. So doing it for yourself, but also looking at it and going, and I don't want anyone else to feel like this either, and this is BS, and I can do something about it, and I want to do something about it. And so I just really love that. And one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to talking to you today, and I sort of half laugh as I say it, because I said to you, didn't I? I was like, I'm really looking forward to talking to you, because you actually, you know, I've had conversations with people, but we don't know what we're talking about.
Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about either.
You're like, actually, I think a lot of people be the same. Like, you know the stuff, but I am really looking forward to talking to you, because obviously, like you said, and you say it came from a judgy place, but that's sort of one of the downsides of social media, isn't it? That it gives people a platform, whether they have the expertise or not, to give advice. But you do actually have like the qualifications and the learning and all of that behind that stuff. So, you know, I said about like imposter syndrome, and we were talking about this just before we started recording. It seems to have become, which I love the fact that more people are talking about it, because I think a few years ago people didn't even know, and some people might know what that is, still not know what that is. So we can talk about that in a second. But it almost gets to the point where not it becomes a buzzword, because it's not, but so many people are talking about it and giving advice, and it's like, do you have like any qualifications? One of the things you said to me was like, well, maybe we could have a chat about you know, like where that even originated from and where that's come from, which I jumped on, because I love to know, like, and a lot of this is what this podcast is going to be about. I love to know the why behind stuff. So do you want to, from your expert point of view, firstly give a little bit of an explanation about what imposter syndrome is, if people have never heard of it before, but talk a little bit about like where that did actually come from in the first place and kind of the history of it?
And I think that's kind of goes back to the whole reason of doing this, is I think when we do spend a lot of time on social media, or like everyone's got a voice, everyone's got an opinion, and actually knowing what the language you're using, where it came from, what it means, is like really important, because it keeps a dialogue going that maybe all of us are just, you know, getting swept up in, and I think that's really important. So imposter syndrome, when you look at that term and history of kind of when that appeared and when we started using it, was around the 1970s, and it came from a psychologist who was observing women and why they were responding or behaving differently from their male counterparts in high-powered positions, right? So they noticed there was a difference, and that women in general were had higher levels of self-doubt than their male counterparts did. So if you go back to what was happening in the 1970s, like, women didn't have rights. Like, they weren't allowed to vote. They were fighting for maternity pay. They were still, if it was a married woman, they were still the property of their husband. They had no property rights, or, you know, a man could decide how they disciplined their wife, and there was no consequence for that. So that was all the social background when then they were watching these women who miraculously had made it into a high-powered position and thought, oh, you've got higher self-doubt than your male counterparts do. So that's when the term, and of course they did, right? So then imposter syndrome became a term that then was kind of made more mainstream. So I think it's really important to know the background of that, because when we're using that term, we need to think about that woman that was trying our best to change the culture of what we're trying to step into and make more equitable now. So yeah, that's where the phrase came from, and when you actually break down imposter syndrome just as a definition, so like imposter means actively trying to deceive somebody, right? And syndrome is a clinical term. It's something that's wrong with us. We're broken. It needs fixed. And I think, again, do we really want to use that label for ourselves? That there's something wrong with us?
Yeah.
And then why is this social thing then become about us not being good enough, or us not performing as well as others, or that we're going to get caught out? So I think we use imposter syndrome a lot. I'm not always convinced that that's what we're talking about. I think there's other things at play often. But yeah, that's the background to that term and the definition.
That is so interesting. Partly, like you said, like on the language and stuff, but also all that stuff around, like, actually, is it even what we have? Because it's also like, it's the best and worst parts of like social media and Google and whatever, and you search for something and this term comes up and you're like, yeah, that's what I have. But like without really thinking about it. But also, I always find it wild when we're talking about, like back in the 70s, which wasn't that long ago, and thinking about like the right, like how much has changed in that time, the rights women had, because I think, I can't remember when it actually happened, but I'm sure back in the 70s they couldn't even have their own bank account, could they? Was that
Yeah,
before that? I was
I'm
reading
not
something
sure,
about
but likely to be roundabout. Yeah.
yeah. And also I found it really interesting, like, just because this is always one of my pet peeves, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but whenever you talk about, well, any kind of women's issue, someone will pop up in the comments and be like, men have that too. And it's like, yeah, no, not saying they don't.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
it's really interesting to know, like, it came from a study of women, like, and it came from, like a whole history in women's rights. I find that really interesting too. And I
Yeah.
think it's like, this is why I love knowing the why behind stuff, because those kind of comments irritate me, and so and things like you said, like people sort of banding it around and it becoming a buzzword can annoy me, but I don't know why I'm getting annoyed by it. And I think the more I understand about the why and the actual,
Mm-hmm.
like the science of it, or whatever you'd call it, it's like, oh no, I'm sort of right about why I'm getting annoyed, but now I can actually explain that as well, which is
Yeah.
why I think it's
Yeah.
important.
And it
People like,
is an experience that is experienced by all genders, like it's not, but it's funny how I think in general, this is very, very like generic statement. It's mostly women who would say imposter syndrome as opposed to males. And again, it's just this idea that we're not right, that we're broken, that we need fixed, that there's something wrong with us, and that's a clinical thing, and it's just a really horrible way for
yeah,
us to be thinking about ourselves. So
yeah.
if you can rephrase it just on a very, very basic term of just it's self-doubt, and self-doubt is part of the human experience, and
Yeah.
self-doubt is step one to self-confidence. You know, I sort of imagine it that we have self-doubt as block one, then we have self-efficacy, which is your belief, self-belief that you can learn to do something, right? So like you maybe don't know how to fly a plane, but you know that you have the ability to learn how to fly a plane, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe I aimed a bit high there, but let's just
Sure.
take the podcast. Let's take the podcast for example, right? So you have self-doubt. I don't know if I can do this. Like, you know, like I don't know the technology and how to structure the interviews or whatever. And then we have self-efficacy of knowing like, actually, well, I believe that I can learn that. I can get my way around it. I can ask people for help. I can go on a course. I can just do one episode and see how it feels. And then you have self-confidence. So self-confidence comes once you've made the podcast, then you're like, actually, I can do that. Like, you know, so, but you have to have self-doubt has to be part of that process. And the more we can recognize that, the more it's easier for us to acknowledge that it's part of the journey. It's a part of the journey to self-confidence. And confidence always comes after you've learned how to do something, not before.
Yeah. And you know, I just love all of this. And one of the things I was going to say is I think this is why, and it kind of ties in nicely with the point of the podcast and sort of why I wanted to podcast. But like, because I love your socials and I love what you put out on your socials because you talk about all this stuff. But why it's so important that, you know, like you say, you were sat on the sofa sort of feeling judgy, but why people like you do show up and be heard with the name of the podcast, but do show up and get that voice out there, because it's a bit like the social media stuff. There's so much noise out there and all these people saying stuff that aren't necessarily true. So it's really important that you do. And I just, honestly, we said before the podcast started, it was like, oh, we both like to talk. And I feel already it's like, oh my God, I could literally sit and talk about this for hours, which we won't, like hours long.
Promise. Yeah.
So obviously you spoke about kind of imposter syndrome and self-doubt. Are there any other kind of, well, I don't know what the term for it is, but common sort of themes or things that you see amongst women or business owners that are the main things that kind of stand in their way and get in the way of them being successful? Like, are there things, I mean, self-doubt obviously I'm guessing covers lots of things, but are there other things that you sort of see?
Yeah, well, they're all, to be honest, they're all packaged up in the same thing. So we have like perfectionism and you know, very like black and white thinking, or if it doesn't look like this, then I can't do it at all type thing. There's self-doubt and self-sabotage and all of these things, but they're all the same thing in a sense of that your brain is trying to keep you safe. So we have to remember that our nervous system is hardwired for comfort. Like, we like to be comfortable, and that's just what your body's naturally like. And the thing that actually makes us do things is there's lots of different terms for it. You might call it your soul, or your, you know, that kind of inner drive that you have. People might call it your ego, whatever. That is the bit that's hardwired for growth. It wants to do more, to reach potential, to, you know, like go and do the scary thing. So you've got these two parts of you that are working in conflict with each other, and they're designed to work in conflict with each other because you don't want to be all one or all the other. Yeah. Like, so they're designed to balance each other. But what, if you imagine it like two sides of your brain, it's not, by the way, if you're a neuroscientist listening to this thinking, but just in layman's terms, if it's the left and right side of your brain, then one muscle is going to get stronger than the other, depending on what you spend a lot of time doing. Yeah. So if you're somebody who is used to feeling the fear and just doing the thing anyway, then that side of your brain gets a bit stronger. And if you're somebody who like consistently stays in your comfort zone, then that bit gets a bit stronger. We all get good at what we do a lot of. So we're designed for that conflict between those two areas, and whatever your brain can use as evidence to keep you safe and keep you in the comfort zone, whether that is perfectionism, anxiety, overwhelm, resentment, self-doubt, it will do that. And that's just how we're programmed.
Honestly, I absolutely love all of that. And as you were earlier on, you used the example of the podcast, and I know that like I've done a lot of work on my mindset and my confidence over like the last few years. And I think I've used all the strategies like in the process of putting this podcast together that I've like kind of learned over that time. But I just love, and I'm here for the simple language because like not the
Yeah.
neuro neuroscience language. I will get them on at a later point as an interview guest. but it's but it just makes so much sense when you break it down sort of that simply, like and it yeah. So would you have you got any, because obviously because I say about like I've done lots of work and I've learned lots of strategies and tools, and I feel like now I sort of have a bit of a toolbox of things that I go to sort of when I need it and what I need to do in that time. Have you, so what I was going to say is I know there's hundreds of things and strategies and different things you can do, but have you got some kind of, I don't know, like favorite strategies or ones that you see work best for people when they're facing that kind of self-doubt?
Yeah. So first of all, I think we need to keep coming back to this sort of self-compassion, that there's nothing wrong with you, right? That this is part of the process. And actually by me, and I'm going to contradict myself by then giving you strategies to fix it, right? So I always struggle with that kind of balance between the two things. However, we do know that as much as it is part of the process, that we do get stuck there, right? So the strategies are designed for that. But I think the first thing that I always encourage people to do, and it's like one of the first things I would do with people in therapy or if they were kind of coming on any of my programs, is to understand like how your brain works. Like your brain is really quite small, and it's something like, oh, this stat is somewhere in my head. It's something around 1/500th of your body weight. Is small, but it uses 20% of your calories, which means that it needs to be really efficient. Your brain has to be efficient. So your frontal cortex, your frontal lobe, that is doing all of the kind of, it does the thinking, it does the, oh, what's this new thing? Okay, cool. This is how I do it. And it does that 20 times. And it's like, I've got that now. I know what the plan is. And then it shoves it into the mid part of your brain, where it then becomes a habit, just becomes what you do, right? So you don't think about it. And that's really helpful for things like walking. Like you don't have to learn how to walk every day. You just do it, right? But when it comes to habits, like I say to you, oh, you could totally do that. And your habit is to immediately say like, oh no, I can't do that. Like that's not, well, I don't know, things like that. Or like, then that becomes habit too. And that moves into your midbrain and it just becomes unconscious and you just do the thing that you're used to doing. So if you can understand that, like that's what your brain is doing. So like you are spending a lot of energy trying to change these patterns, but actually your brain is like, I know how we show up here. So this is a direction I'm going in.
Yeah.
And I think then if we can appreciate that, then it helps us to lean into self-compassion a wee bit more, that actually changing patterns, changing habits is really hard work. And that's
Yeah.
not for you to listen to this podcast and think like, oh, well, just give up then. Because there's definitely things that we can do, but it's just about recognising how we're programmed, and that we have to look at the bigger picture. It's not just about, I'm going to try this strategy.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll work. I was listening to, I think it was a TED talk, and he described it really good analogy is that you can go to these courses, you can listen to podcasts, you can be all fired up, and you're like a little ant, right? And the ant is marching north. It's like, yep, no, I'm going to do that. I know I've got this strategy in my back pocket, and it's marching north. But actually, when you zoom out and look at the big picture, it's marching north over an elephant that's marching south, right? So it feels like progress, but actually, when the year is out, you're not that much further forward than you are. So my first advice to anybody is to work on the direction of the elephant first. Like, do the inner work. Do the
Yeah.
work of why it feels safer to stay where you are. Always.
Yeah.
You can do
Yeah.
all of the courses, you can go to these events that pump you up and you feel amazing, and you're that, like, you're coming out of this self-development thing as a happy ant ready to go. But actually, if you don't know what direction your brain is heading in and why, then
Yeah.
it's very difficult to change those patterns long term. Because we all have reasons why it's safer for us to stay where we are. It's safer for us to doubt ourselves. It's safer for us to think it's not perfect, so I'm not putting it out yet. And that
Yeah.
tends to come with like core beliefs that we've had established for a long time.
Yeah.
About how good we are, whether we're worth it or not. So those building blocks that I gave you at the start of kind of that self-doubt is step one, self-efficacy is step two, and self-confidence is step three. Then actually what underpins that whole staircase is self-worth and self-esteem. So if you don't care for yourself,
Yeah.
then that those steps can't even build, you know. And
Yeah.
so that's the work you have to do. And so that my first advice is always to do the inner work and spend your money there, like,
Yeah.
because that's the stuff that really changes it. And I think social media has a lot to answer for when we just tell women, like, it's a mindset, you know, it's your mindset, just quit your job,
Yeah.
it's your mindset. And you're like, hold on a minute, like, it's so much more complex than that.
Yeah.
And then yet again, it's up to us. It's the that's put on us that we didn't manifest that hard enough, or we didn't just, you know, take the leap of faith. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I took 3 years to quit my job because I wanted to know that this, you know, I mean, that wasn't a mindset issue. That was a
Yeah.
strategic decision that let me play with my business and not live in
Yeah.
fear of trying to make money. And it's allowed me to show up authentically for those years.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I guess
yeah,
that was you, yeah, you knowing, because none of like the strategy, whatever, it's not necessarily like a one size fits all, is it? Like some people can quit
never.
their job straight away and go into their business and try it out. And you know, there's loads of things behind that of why people couldn't do that, you know, like finances and life circumstances and all that kind of thing. But even if everybody was on the same level playing field, our brains all work differently as to how we do it. But I don't think, as I was listening to you talking then, I was like, no, I don't think, and you might say, no, you've misunderstood this completely, but I don't think you were contradicting yourself at all, because the way I sort of look at it is like the first step of what you were saying is actually this is completely normal. Like you are normal for, and I think that's one of the things I really want to do through this podcast is like all of this is so normal. Like
Yeah,
everybody feels like it, but we recognize that it's normal and that's great, but we then recognize that isn't the way it has to be. And it's not because you're broken. You don't have to fix anything, but you can get better, and you can, you know, grow and train yourself and do different things to grow and get better. So your normal, it becomes a new normal of sort of
yeah,
where you are. So I don't necessarily view it as, and maybe I did in the past, but just listening to you talking, then I was like, actually, I wouldn't view it as fixing something that's broken. It's about recognizing that this is totally normal, but it doesn't have to be this way. And there are
yeah,
things that you can do to not feel like this and to grow and to be
yeah,
better. And I look back at like all of the things that like that I've done, and I partly because of the circumstances that led me to get to where I am like now and with opening my business and all that kind of stuff. But I had therapy, had 2 lots of life coaching, have done a shed ton of work on my mindset. But like you said, like I went to lots of workshops and sessions on mindset. But if I just went and listened and left, really, it was that whole elephant analogy, which I love, and went, yeah, that's brilliant. But like didn't do anything with it. You have to do the work yourself, don't you? And it's a bit
yeah,
like, I think one of the best ways I make decisions now is I'm really, really clear and strong on my values, and I know what my values are. I know what so I have a personal mission statement. I know what that is. I'm really clear on it. And if ever I don't know how to make a decision, I go back to that and read that and
yeah,
go, no, this is what it's about. This is how you make decisions. That came from going to a mindset session where it was like, this is why a personal vision statement, or personal mission statements are brilliant. This is what you should put in them. This is what you should do. And I think I was one of a very few people that actually then went away and we wrote bits of it, but
yeah,
you don't get enough time on, you know, like even if you go to a week's conference, you don't get enough time to actually do the work. You have to go away
yeah,
and do it after, don't you? But in the early days of my business, I think for me, I sort of came from, I didn't know how to do all the business stuff because you don't know how to do it all, but I'd worked in quite a senior position. I'd done strategies, I'd managed teams, I'd done all this stuff. What I needed to really work on and invest the time in, and I shared this with, it was 5 years since I left my job the other day, and it was like the 5 lessons, typical for social media, 5 lessons I've learned in 5
Yeah.
years. One of them was exactly what you said, of like, the most important investment you can make is in yourself. But I also think, and I don't know what your thoughts on this are, as women, and I know that I did, and I had to sort of battle through some of this. We feel so guilty about spending. Like, I spent quite a lot of money on the life coaching, investing in myself, all that kind of stuff. And I remember at the time I was thinking, oh, but I could take like the kids away on holiday. Like, I've always wanted to take the kids to Disney,
Yeah.
which I know we've both now done, but I've always wanted to take the or actually, that's a huge chunk of money that go towards that. But actually, like, none of that matters unless you're okay in yourself. But I
Yeah.
think there's a step in that in the first place, that you've got to overcome the guilt of like that money isn't a luxury. Like, if you can do it, it's so important to invest in
Yeah,
yourself.
and I think I think spending the money in the right place as well. Like, we can all, and it goes back to that comfort zone thing. It's like, it's easy for us to, and like, this is maybe not great for some of the businesses, right? But sales pages are designed to say, like, here's that short term problem that you've got. Like, come and
Yeah,
do this and we'll fix that short. And that's not to say that that's not a great idea at times, right? But you want to spend the money, like, with the reason, like the 5-year-old you that's still trying to prove herself to her parents, right? Because that's the one that's showing up. That's the thing that's showing up, that's stopping you from even. It's not about your organization skills. It's because it's actually if you got yourself organized and you put yourself out there, then there's a risk of somebody saying that you're not good enough. And that's what trips us up. So you've got to do that work first, and then spend your money on the things for the organizational tools and that. I think it's like, you've got to work on yourself and stuff. And we all kind of know that, but it's like, it's scary and it's quite intimidating to do that. But really crucial if you want to really, like, balance your brain out for
yeah,
what you're capable of, with still being comfortable most of the time, because
yeah,
we like that. We want our lives to be a bit mundane with a little bit of
yeah.
excitement sprinkled in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's just the learned responsive stuff that you were saying is just really interesting. I remember one of my big light bulb moments. I think it was from the first lot of life coaching I had, but one of my really big light bulb moments was around my fear of failure, which obviously lots of people have a fear of failure. But it was the reframe on, or understanding why I was worried about
Yeah,
failing and why I had such a fear of failure. And for me, it was the light bulb moment was basically, I wasn't particularly scared of failing. Like, I didn't mind if I did something and it didn't work out. I was worried about what other people would think.
yeah,
So, like,
what it
my business,
represents.
yeah, and what it represents in me, and it's like with my business, oh, like, people can, oh, and most of people probably wouldn't have done this, but look at her leaving her job and thinking she can start a business and doing what, or taking pleasure in the fact that it hadn't worked out, or even like with launching this podcast, even when I've done all of the work, it's like, I don't care if no one listens to it. Obviously, I care if people listen to it. I want people to listen to it. But actually, if they don't, it's like, well, okay, that wasn't the right thing. That didn't work out. But my fear around it wasn't people not listening to it. It would be people going, oh, look, she had a podcast and no one listened to it.
Yeah,
And it was a real reframe moment for me. Once I understood that's what I was worried about, I could then understand, oh, actually, what, like, I could do the work on that. So them, whatever they might say, and actually I keep saying they, I don't know who they are.
yeah.
This
No one
great,
ever does. Yeah,
me and Sue spoke about this in the first episode. I was like, no one cares that much about us. They're all like entrenched in their own lives.
yeah,
But once I understood that, it was like, do you know what? If there are some people out there that take pleasure in something not working out for me, that's not about me. Like, that's about
yeah,
them. And as long as I'm okay and I'm happy and comfortable in the decisions I've made, I haven't made any decisions that have, financially ruined my family or, like, caused us huge problems, then that's okay.
yeah,
But I don't think I'd have ever got to that point without understanding And it was, the life coach I worked with at the time was kind of digging into, and at the time I was getting really irritated because she kept going, well, why do you care about that? Why do you care about that? I've just you. Like, I've
Stop
just
asking me why.
it makes you dig more deep into it. It's like, I've told you why. That's she didn't say this at the time, but that's a surface level reason why you're worried about
exactly.
And it is, but it's digging into some quite, and it is from some traumatic things I've been through in the past, and you don't want to say that out loud. You don't want to say like, what if people don't like me, and what if people want to see me fail, and what if people want this? But as soon as you've said it out loud, it's so freeing.
Absolutely. And I think like what my specific therapy that I work with a lot of women with is EMDR. I don't know if you've heard of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. And so that works on like that physical reaction, because I think we get so frustrated with ourselves, don't we? Because we think like, oh, it doesn't matter if it's like, logically we know it doesn't matter if Margaret down the road liked your podcast or not, right? We know that, and we get so frustrated with ourselves that we're still scanning Margaret's face to see if she did listen or did she like it or whatever. So, and that causes this internal conflict. So EMDR is really good with dealing with the physical feeling, like, because we're sort of battling our heads and our bodies. And our body always wins, So like if you can work on releasing that and desensitizing our body to those reactions, that's probably the most freeing like intervention or therapy that I've added to my toolbox over the years, has been EMDR for that reason, that feeling. But other strategies wise, if you're kind of moving away from the kind of the self-compassion stuff is the baseline, right? Why do we work the way that we work? And the reason for that is because your brain's only got a certain amount of energy, and it wants to conserve that and do what it's good at. Which is good news if you start to change your patterns of behaviour, right? Because then you get good at that too. And then the next bit is that sort of like understanding the process and spending your time and energy on what's sending your elephant marching south when you want to go north. Other kind of strategies that you can do is like naming it, so like recognizing that it is part of the journey. So like Friends, the Friends sitcom, they would always start their episodes with the one with, or the episode with, right? So I do that in my own head. Like whenever I recognize that self-doubt, I'm like, oh, here's the self-doubt bit. Like here's the episodes of this. And it's called a cognitive diffusion technique. So rather than I am rubbish or I am not good enough, it's like, oh, here is the thought that I am not good enough. And it's all about just separating it out from ourselves. So if you can recognize it as an episode, like creating this podcast for you has been like a 3-episode series, and you've gone through the self-doubt one, and now you're in the self-efficacy one, and when it goes live you'll be in the self-confidence one. So kind of just playing around with strategies like that help you to acknowledge it as part of the process would be one strategy. What else?
People explain things to me in relation to Friends. I think I understand more about the world. So I absolutely love that. Just before you go on to the next one, can I ask the EMDR? So that was eye movement
desensitization and reprogramming, or reprocessing, dependent.
Well, I don't know a lot about that at the moment. We're starting to see lots more about it, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Not in detail, because obviously I appreciate it's like a whole thing, but explain a little bit about what that is. And is that something that you can do yourself, or do you have to? Because I know some people that are having that at the moment, but they're having it as an actual therapy. But is it? Obviously, I'm imagining it's very different from tapping. But like you can go for tapping, but you can. There's also these videos where you can do tapping yourself. Is it something you can do yourself, or is it something you need?
No, please don't do it yourself. Please. So I have seen, somebody did tell me, they were like, oh, you can do EMDR yourself online, and I did go and look at it, and there are YouTube videos of a kind of ball bouncing about a screen that you follow. But no, it's a really, like, EMDR is an 8-step protocol. And it's really important that you move through those full 8 stages. A lot of people think it's just the eye movements that are EMDR. It's not. So yeah, we do So EMDR, do you want me to give an overview of what EMDR is?
Yeah, if you can, is that
In our
easy to
time slot? Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it quickly. Yeah, I might go over my time. This could be a long. I hope you put on the kettle again if you're listening. So EMDR basically, right? Again, here's very layman's terms. You know the saying, "Your brain is like a sieve." Yeah. So when you go to sleep at night, your brain sifts through everything that has happened. If you imagine like when you're in a deep sleep and you get those rapid eye movements, that our brain is sifting through all of these memories that have happened in the day, all your experiences, and it decides like, oh yeah, those ones we need to keep and those ones we don't need to remember. And that clears out your brain for the next day, right?
Yeah.
What happens with a traumatic experience, and when I'm talking about trauma, I mean anything your brain wasn't prepared for. So our brain works on probability. So like, when you go to the school gate, you kind of know roughly the mums that you're going to see, you know, like what coat your kid was wearing. So your brain is already predicting what's going to happen next. And when that doesn't happen, your kids don't run out of school, then that's not what your brain was predicting was going to happen. So then that can be stored in a different way. Like we physically feel that in our bodies in a different way. So when these traumatic, and that was like a tiny example, but if you've had something a little more significant, like, you know, a car accident or a sexual assault or childhood trauma where you kind of brought up in a house where you didn't feel safe, then those memories get stored in that sieve and your brain doesn't know what to do with it. So it makes a clog in a pipe, right? And when we think about how our memories are stored, they're stored with thoughts and feelings and emotions and also sensations like tightness in your chest or a smell or a taste. And we do that with lots of things. Like if we talk about your granny's favourite apple pie, you can smell it, your mouth starts salivating. That's how we remember memories. So that's why you can hear a siren and you know it's nowhere near you and you know it's nothing to do with you, but your stomach will like lurch because it has a physical reaction to that sound. And that's what we're talking about with EMDR. So we use bilateral stimulation, and I use eye movements or sound for that rather than tapping, but you can use tapping also, which is different from EFT tapping, emotional freedom. What's it? Therapy, maybe? I don't know what the T stands for. So that's not bilateral stimulation. That's something very different.
Right.
So the eye movements or the sound or the tapping, it helps us to use our brain's natural ability to process events that have happened. And it's a very physical thing. So people will say like, oh, I feel like I'm going to be sick, or my chest is tight, or I've got pins and needles in my arms. And so they'll go through all of those physical sensations once we activate that memory. And then we have some thoughts and different things. It looks very different for everybody. But the idea is that we're getting that memory to process in the way that your brain is designed to do that. And it's remarkable. Like it's really using your brain's own power to heal itself. And make sense. It wants to make sense of it. It doesn't know, do I need to remember this? I felt unsafe. How long did I keep this for? So yeah, that's what EMDR does.
Can it, I'm glad I asked about that, because I'm glad I asked about the can you do it yourself, because I have seen things on like social media and whatever, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. But so yeah, to be very clear, don't.
Yeah, really don't. Yeah.
Can it also, and again, I think I've seen this, but I don't know if it's true. Like, you know, where you were saying your brain will sort of sieve out information it doesn't need to know. With the EMDR, can it sort of access part of your brains or unlock things that you've kind of, your brain has kind of gone, yeah, we don't need to know this, but it can make you remember things that you didn't know?
Yeah, which is why like you want to do that in a safe therapeutic environment where you trust the person you're working with. Like I'm watching the people I work with all the time. We work on like how you regulate yourself, how you bring yourself back down to that kind of safe space. And yeah, because you don't know what else your brain has connected with that. And it's like our brains aren't logical. They don't store things logically. So, you know, you can have like a raised tone from somebody which connects with an incident when you were 5 where you felt unsafe. because someone was shouting, and then that links back to your husband who shouts at the kids, and then you're just like, why do you always speak to them in that tone? And he's like, what tone? And you have that
Yeah.
conversation. Right. So, but all of that, your brain has like stored all of that together, but you know that your husband is not like that man when you were
Yeah.
5, but your body's reaction is so we need to do it in a safe place.
Yeah.
Where I'm tracking all of those thoughts as you're saying them out loud.
Yeah.
And then, we're kind of piecing that whole picture together. And
Yeah.
at times, yes, it can. Once one set of thoughts come, it then releases another set. But that's
Yeah.
not to put people off it. I think people are scared to go for the root cause because of the energy that might take up. But I can assure you, living with that in your body takes up just as much energy as dealing with it.
Yeah, and honestly, that could open up a whole nother conversation. I realise we don't like.
I know.
Have the
We'll
time
maybe come
for.
back to that another day.
But I feel like I need to get you back on again at some point, just time. But just that stuff around, like, actually, it is. I think people think that some of that work can be. People are scared of it, aren't they? Because it can be painful, but you've got to kind of come through that pain. One of the questions I just wanted to ask, and then I will wrap up because I know we need to stop. I've got so many questions. Would you say something like EMDR? Because I always think if I had like all the money in the world, I'd love like proactive therapy. I had therapy and life coaching, all that kind of stuff at a point where I really needed it. I'd kind of broken and I needed to work through some of that stuff, which obviously then makes that stuff more painful. But it's stuff like so I just always think if I had all the money in the world, I would have therapy every week just to chat, just to get stuff out of your head, because I just think it's so powerful. And all of these different, like with experts and professionals tapping, all that kind of stuff. Is EMDR something that is it more of a reactive therapy, or is it something that could actually benefit anyone from doing?
Anyone. I feel like I talk about it a lot. Like, I've had EMDR myself. I pretty much offer it to every single client I work with. There are some contraindications that you wouldn't use EMDR, but very few. And so I think all of us have got particularly relational trauma. So basically, anytime we're in relation with others, trauma can occur. Because there's always misunderstandings, and we hear something and, like, we make judgments from what that is, what that person thought about us and stuff. And I think that's what's driving us 90% of the time. Like, it's so, and going back to that ant and the elephant analogy, it's like that is what your brain is doing when it's marching south and you want to go north. So I think it can, and it's not a long-term therapy. So like EMDR is designed to be a quick therapy. That doesn't mean that it's a one-hit wonder. But it was originally done for like going into war zones and, working with soldiers and stuff. And so it's not meant to be come and sit with me every week and talk about that. And I certainly don't advocate that. Like I want my clients to feel each week that they need these sessions less and less. There are other therapies that would argue differently from that, but for myself, I don't want to be seeing people more than like
no, and
20
also it's a way to sort of. I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and it was about a very different thing. But it's a way to see that you've been successful in your job. Like, I wouldn't want, even on the social media side, for someone to work with me for however long, and if they left me, they couldn't cope with it. Like, I'd feel like I'd failed them. So I suppose a bit like with the therapist, if they don't leave more able to cope with, life and knowing all that stuff, then it kind of hasn't worked, has it? If it's something you need.
Yeah, and I mean, there are people who like go for the same reason you talked about, that they just, want to offload their brain every week and download that and stuff. But again, I think there's something there about, like, I want the women I work with to feel like they're not a project. They don't have to. They don't have to keep working on themselves all the time, be this better version and like keep pushing. And, like, I want people to feel content. And that doesn't mean that you're not still aiming for more or achieving more, but it's playful and it's, you know what I mean? And it doesn't represent who you are as a person.
Yeah. Honestly, Laura, thank you so much. I have about 1,000 other questions that I could ask you.
That's okay.
And I do feel like somewhere down the line, I might have to just ask you to come back on.
Shall I give a very quick, like, here's a couple of strategies just for the self-doubt.
Yeah,
If you tuned in specifically for self-doubt, I don't want you to feel like you've been
go away
shortchanged
and
here.
yeah. Yeah, we've spoken about all the big stuff, the stuff they could go away.
So, quick fire round of techniques for self-doubt. So, know your brain, how it works. Then the second thing is environment always trumps will. Okay, your environment will always have a bigger impact than your willpower. So surround yourselves with people, friends who are cheerleaders. It's so important, and we talk about it a lot. Listen to podcasts like this. You know, like if you're going for advice, think about who you're asking advice from before you ask it. All of these things, because who's around you in your environment will always have a bigger impact than what you think after listening to this podcast. Yeah, I'm going to go and do that. Right. If you go and speak to your pal and they're like, oh no, I couldn't do therapy. Like, oh, can you imagine? It'll be terrible. Then that will always win. Yeah. So think about who's in your environment and what you're doing. Other thing to do really practically is actually write down everything that you've done. Like just map out your career, the courses you've done, the personal experience you've got, and look at it on paper as a timeline. Because when we're feeling self-doubt, we're looking at everybody who's in front of us, who's got more years than us, and you can't get more years till you've got them. So, it's important to kind of look back and think, okay, well, these are all the things that I've done that make me want to come onto this call. As soon as you said, like, you're the expert, my body was like, correct her, tell her you're not an expert, Laura. Come on, quick, get it in, right? Because my body is saying, well, no, there's people listening to this podcast who will have way more years experience than me. But what I'm remembering is actually I've had conversations with thousands of people. I have studied this. I have a qualification. I have a heart for it. Like I'm showing up authentically. So these are all the things that help me to say, no, come on, don't correct her. Just answer the questions and people will take from it what they want. So map that out. Take a trip down memory lane and write out your experience. Other strategies that I would use with people is break that thing down into small steps. So when you say like, I'm going to start my own podcast, that feels massive. But if you just play around with the technology or you go on the podcast course and before you know it, each step takes you one step closer to actually just doing the thing. So whatever you're thinking about and procrastinating on just now, just spend the next 15 minutes writing down what are the 10 small steps that would come before doing the actual thing and start taking one off at a time. Most of us just incrementally get closer to our goal. Very few people kind of just go, I'm just going to start a business, and they quit their job overnight and do that. So, write that down. And the last one I want to say is debrief an event. So once you have felt that something was scary and you managed to do it, you need to debrief with your brain. So you can do that by writing it down like in a journal, just writing like, this is how I felt before, this is how I felt doing it, and this is how I feel afterwards. Because your brain is designed to only focus on the negative. So it doesn't actually transfer that skill of like, oh, it's all right, I felt this last time, but I felt okay afterwards. It's just like, oh no, this feels worse. Like every time, oh no, I know I did it, but this time is really worse, right? So you need to debrief. And I do that by voice noting myself. So I'm not very good at writing. I don't like journaling. I don't like meditating, all of these things that people advocate. So I voice note myself and I'll just say like, like when I come off this podcast, I'll say like, it was nice. It was good to chat. I enjoyed it. We'll just see what people think of it, that kind of thing. And so that my brain has that full picture of what the reality was, not just the bit that felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Those would be my tips for challenging some self-doubt.
That is absolutely amazing. I love all of that. And I was going to say a couple of the questions I ask at the end, but I think you've pretty much nailed the first one with what you've just said, is what things help you show up in your business and what advice would you give someone else to do the same? And I think what you've just said there smashes it basically. And I really like it is because obviously a lot of what we've spoken about, it does involve, we can talk about it's really important to invest in yourself, but not everyone is in a position to do that like right now, and it is a privilege to be able to do that in lots of ways. So I love that there's some quick things people can take away.
Yeah.
So final question, which again you've sort of covered in certain bits, but what advice would you go back and give yourself in the early days of running your business, if you could?
Stay in your own lane. Stay in your own lane. Like exactly what you said, like you know your values, you know why you're doing it. Like I remember like looking at a lot of business owners, and that wasn't my circle because that wasn't where I was going. But now, you know, when I started this, and I'd be like, why are you doing this? Like, this looks miserable. Like, you look exhausted. Why? Oh, well, I've got flexibility. All right. What do you use that flexibility for? Oh, well, like, you know, I pick up the kids on a Tuesday at 3:00. Okay. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, think about what do you want? This is a business that you're going to be running. Like, how do you want that to look? And focus in on that, because there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise. A lot of people saying, do this, do that, you know, do this course, work on this platform. And I think just I got distracted for a good chunk of my time doing this, and that's my biggest regret. Actually, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and when I've stayed in my lane is when I've been most successful, in inverted commas.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's so funny. I literally had a conversation with my husband about something completely separate this morning, nothing to do with business. But he was like, why are you so good at trusting your gut in business, but not like in like personal life stuff? And it is, I feel like this is what I needed to hear, like straight after that conversation, this whole conversation, because it is like that, stay in your lane, you know, 99% of the time, which is what he said to me this morning, you know what you want to do. So just do it. So yeah, I feel that's a really nice note to end on. So Laura, where can people come and find you? Where's the best place to find out more about you? Where do you hang out?
Yeah, so my website will have, you know, everything on it. Do you put the website in the show notes?
I will. I'll put all the links in the show notes.
Okay. And so then we'll put in a link also to like my Facebook page, and also I run a Facebook group called Making Me Matter that people can come in there, and I'll post like lives of I've got a couple of clients that are share their stories and things like that. And the whole vibe of that group is to encourage people to stay in their own lane. We don't offer advice, you know, it's all about like holding that space for clarity for yourself. So you can do that. And then I've sort of designed my services around, there's a program that you can do, and a kind of online thing. So you do the online videos, and that teaches you all about your brain and how it works and how you identify these core issues or core stories that you tell yourself. So I want to give people those thought tools to do, because I think that's the building block, and there's live sessions included with that. And then the second part is that I hope people will then come to work with me on a one-to-one on the specific things, and that's quite targeted and focused because you've already done the thought work. And then I run a membership as well, that then people can then, coming out of therapy, be in there just to kind of continue that work and have that bit of support. So my goal is that people feel supported through that whole journey, and you're actually doing the therapy bit for the shortest amount of time.
Yeah. Amazing. And that the Facebook group that you mentioned, was it Making Me Matter? Is that a free
Making Me Matter? Yeah, it's free. Yeah, and I put lots of resources in there as well.
Fantastic. I didn't know you did that. I'm going to come in and join.
Yeah, do. Come.
I will put all the links to all that stuff in the show notes so you can go and find it. And I really recommend you do, because honestly, I hope you've loved this conversation as much as I have. I could sit on here for another good few hours with you just chatting about. But thank you so much for giving us your time today, Laura. And I will speak to you very soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Show Up and Be Heard. But please don't go without telling me your name. I genuinely love meeting new people and making new connections. So if you don't already, I'd love it if you'd come find me on Instagram, LinkedIn or Facebook and drop me a message to say hello and let me know what you thought of the episode. The link to all my socials are in the show notes. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode or found it useful, then I'd really appreciate it if you could take just a few minutes to give it a review on whatever platform you are listening on, because every one I get really does make me do a little squeal and a big happy dance. Finally, more than anything else, please always remember, realising that you're not actually meant to do this stuff alone is the first step to making it easier. So I'll see you next time.